From analog.
Hi, Jim. You've a great signal up here. You're 5.9 plus.
To digital.
We are everywhere you want to be. This is the CQ Blind Hams Podcast.
Hello, CQ Blind Hams Podcast listeners. This is Robert NC5R. Welcome to a podcast about making a backup image that's bootable for micro SD cards. The micro SD card has become suddenly very important to many of us because it is the storage that is used with the tiny Raspberry Pi computers that many of us use as the integral part of our hotspots or nodes, as we call them. And since the brains are stored on a micro SD card, I decided that it was very important for me to figure out how to back them up so that I have copies in case something goes wrong. I simply have to insert one of my backups into my clear node, and then it will be able to reboot and I'll be back up and running without a problem. So a lot of people have done this, and I got help from people along the way to understand how to go about it, but it hasn't been very well documented in my opinion. So I wanted to record this relatively brief podcast about how to do it. The first thing that you will need, of course, is a blank micro SD card. And these are tiny little devices that are really more, in my opinion, the size of a chip than the size of a card. But nonetheless, it's called a micro SD card. For the Raspberry Pi devices, you need a class 10. That's the number 10 micro SD card. You can get them online from places like Amazon. I got mine from Sweetwater.com. You need probably to get somewhere around a 16 gigabyte card. They're easier to find than smaller ones. The images don't take up that much space, but a 16 gigabyte card from Sweetwater was only about $7. You need to also make sure that in addition to getting a class 10 micro SD card, you get one with an adapter. And the purpose of the little adapter is to convert this micro SD card into a card that is essentially the size of a regular SD card, because most of our computers have regular SD card slots built into them. If you don't have a regular SD card slot, you can purchase a USB SD card slot that this micro SD in its adapter will fit into. And so your computer will be able to read and access the SD card. So in addition to the micro SD card, you will also need a piece of software. And I'm going to assume for this podcast that we're using a Windows-based computer. I'm using a Windows 10 laptop. The piece of software that you will need, at least the one that I used and the one that most other hams that I know use, is a piece of open source software called Win32 Disk Imager. It will be available as a download from blindhams.com. It's also available various places on the web, such as SourceForge. The file that you will want to download will be Win32 Disk Imager setup.exe. When you run this setup file on your computer, it will run a typical Windows install type program. The one thing that you may want to be paying attention to when you run setup is to make sure to tell it to install an icon for Win32 Disk Imager on your desktop. That makes it easier to locate when you're actually ready to use it. By default, this setup program does not have that option checked. So once you get Win32 Disk Imager installed, you will then need to move on to the next step of this process. The next step will be to remove your current micro card from your node or hotspot. And that honestly I found to be a bit challenging. The first thing you will want to be sure and do is to properly shut down your node. You'll want to find out how your particular node is properly shut down. You do not want to just pull the power from your node or just simply unplug it. With the ClearNode that I have, there is a way inside the ClearNode app that's running on my phone to properly shut the node down. There are also All-Star DTMF commands for shutting down a node, but you better make sure that you know how to shut yours down properly. Once the node is shut down, you can then remove the power from it. You'll need to locate the little slot on your particular node where the micro SD card is located. You'll need to take a fingernail and pry the little card gently out of the slot. You'll want to do it gently so that you can grab hold of this little micro SD card when it's removed from the slot. You don't want it flying across the room. Trust me, I learned the hard way that if you tug on it too hard and it pops out and flies across the room, it's very difficult to locate this tiny little card in the carpet or under the couch or wherever it lands. So you want to be careful about getting it out. And then once you get it out, you want to put it in the little adapter that you got with your new micro SD card that you purchased. Of course, you want to be very careful with this little micro SD card because at this moment in the process, this is the only copy that you probably have of the software that's required to run your node or hotspot. You want to then take the SD card in its adapter to your computer and plug it in to your PC. What will happen at that point is your PC should recognize the card and assign it a drive letter. You will want to probably go into File Explorer in Windows and double check and make sure that you know which drive letter your SD card is assigned to. It's now time to make sure you're at your desktop and start the Win32 Disk Imager software. What very likely will happen when that software loads is that it will very likely automatically set itself to the drive where the SD card is located. There's a combo box on that screen that shows you which drive the software is recognized, and you might want to double check it to make sure that it's set to the drive letter that your SD card is actually in, but it probably will be by default. At the very top of this window, there is an edit box, which is the first thing that I come to when I open the program, and I'm using JAWS on my Windows 10 PC. In the edit box, you want to type a complete path name. And that path name is going to actually end up being where the new image file that gets created is stored on the hard drive of your PC. What I actually did before I even started Win32 Disk Imager was I created a folder on my C drive so that I could type in the path and Win32 would recognize that it was a valid path. I don't know for sure whether Win32 Disk Imager will create the folder for you if you don't do it ahead of time. It either will or you'll get an error saying path does not exist or something like that. I'm not sure, but I did it ahead of time. And I just created a folder on my C drive with the path C:\clear node, so that I knew I was going to store a file in that folder containing my backup image. So in the edit box in Win32 Disk Imager that I just mentioned, I typed in the full path, including the directory and the file name that I wanted it to use when it stored this image file. So I typed in C:\clear node /clear node backup.img. That's India Mike Golf. That's the file type. It's an image file, .img. That's what the Win32 Disk Imager software is going to create. So it's very important to get that complete path typed in correctly. Once you've done that, you simply tab down to a button called Read. You activate that button with either the space bar or the enter key, and then what will happen is the Disk Imager software will start reading the information from your SD card and writing it to that folder on your hard drive that we discussed earlier. And JAWS at least reads numbers as it's creating these blocks on your hard drive. And it, on my computer anyway, it took about 15 or 20 minutes for the entire image to get created. When it was complete, the software said image successfully created, and there was an OK button that I could press at that point. So now you have a backup image, a bootable image, stored on the hard drive of your computer. You can go ahead and remove the SD card and put it in a safe place, because it is your original micro SD card for whatever node or hotspot you have. Next, you want to put the new blank micro SD card into the adapter, plug it into your PC, and run Win32 Disk Imager again. You still want at that point to type in the path name just as you did before, which in my case was C:\clear node /clear node backup.img. This time, after you type in the path name, you want to go down just past the read button. There will be a new button that doesn't appear when there's nothing on the computer for to be written to the SD card when the image has not been saved to the computer yet. The right button doesn't appear. But this time it will appear, and you want to press the space bar or press enter on the right button, which will now do the reverse. It will write the image that's on your hard drive to the blank SD card. And this will take even a bit longer than it did to read the image from the SD card and write it to the computer. But once it's done, it will again say successful, and you'll have an OK button. Now you will have a bootable image of the software that's required to boot up and run your Raspberry Pi, which is, as I said, the heart of your node or hotspot. So you'll want to take that image that you just created on that little micro SD card back to your node, plug the card back into your node, and then you can power it back up, and it should come up just as it did with the original micro SD card that you took out of your node. And you can then operate from the backup micro SD, and you'll have your original in safekeeping in case you need it at some point, in case something goes wrong. And it probably will someday. It usually does when it comes to software corruption. I hope this information has been clear and concise enough that it's easy to follow. Feel free, if you need to contact me, to send me an email about this. My email address is my call sign, NC5R, November Charlie 5 Romeo, at iCloud.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this information is useful.
Please don't forget to subscribe to CQ Blind Hams podcast and also visit www.blindhams.com.